I'm Regent Scott. We have a quorum and can conduct business. Dr. Villarreal will be with us shortly. She was running just a few minutes late today. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Ms. Everett, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If you'll join us in reading the Del Mar College Vision Statement. Del Mar College will be the premier choice for life-changing educational opportunities provided by responsive, innovative faculty and staff who empower students to improve local and global communities. Thank you very much. Del Mar is streaming live audio and video from our official Board of Regents meetings on the college's website in real time, with the exception of portions of the meeting that may be considered closed session by statute. At this time, we have an opportunity for public comment for any items that are not on our agenda today. Is there anyone here to provide public comment? Seeing none, we will move on with our item of business for today is discussion of our proposed maintenance and operations budget and the debt service budget for fiscal year 22-23. Dr. Escamilla, do you have any opening comments?
Just that this is an opportunity going into the peak of budget season as we prepare for next year's fiscal year to review, reflect, and to gain as much feedback from our regents as possible. I want to thank, before we go one step further, I just want to thank our team over in the Business Services Office and led by Mr. Garcia for all the effort getting to this point, and everybody who's come together, the entire college has come together and contributed to getting us to this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Regents Hutchison and Bennett, I will trust that you'll holler if you have a question or want Mr. Garcia to stop at any time, since it'll be a little bit difficult for him to see you versus us. But please, Mr. Garcia, go right ahead.
Today's presentation has been a collective effort by the entire college as well as my team. So I want to thank them for all their hard work in getting us to this point. So this budget workshop for the proposed 2023 budget plan could potentially set the stage for the board to approve the budget and the tax in the coming weeks. Today's body of work is built on the backdrop of multiple factors, including the uncertainty of the pandemic, elevated energy prices, supply chain stresses, tight labor markets, all of which are currently contributing in part to the college's elevated operating costs. There's also a focus on resource allocation towards operating activities in support of the college's strategic vision, coupled with downward pressure due to revenue increase limitations. Our revenue increase limitations is driven in part to the college's commitment to our students of steady and modest tuition increases. There's also legislative property tax limits that requires voter approval for an increase of 8% or more from the preceding tax year. Before going into the proposed budget details, I want to start off with a few budget calendar highlights on the next slide.
Pardon me, please note for the record that Dr. Villarreal has joined us.
Okay. So the month of August will be busy, and it's filled with board approvals for public hearings and various other action items. At our regular board meeting scheduled for August 9th, the college will request board approval to conduct a public hearing on August 23rd for the proposed budget and property tax rates. The time for this meeting has not been determined, but as a reference point, last year's meeting started at 10:30 in the morning. And then there's also at the end of the public hearing scheduled for August 23rd, the college will present several action items for board approval, including the proposed 2023 budget, tax rates, and property tax exemptions. The time for this meeting has not been determined, but as a reference point, last year's meeting started at noon. And then I want to also mention that any feedback that may lead to any potential changes, feedback from the board, we will reflect with an update. We will reflect those changes with an update, if needed, at our next board meeting. If there are no questions, Mr. John Johnson will lead us into the discussion on our proposed 2023 budget revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Ms. Pettis, I would like us to get those times confirmed as soon as possible so the board members have them on their calendars. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Regents. As indicated on the first slide, my presentation will begin with challenges and assumptions which were considered in compiling the budget for fiscal year 2023. Starting off with tuition and fees, as all of you are aware, enrollment was significantly impacted by COVID-19. It was initially anticipated pre-COVID enrollment levels would return by fiscal year 22. Due to the continued problems associated with the issue, enrollments did not return as expected. Due to this continued issue, it was decided to reduce the pre-COVID enrollment levels by 10%. At present, we are still early in the registration process for the fall term. It is expected that with the opening of the Oso Creek campus and the increase in face-to-face instruction, that students will once again return to campus to complete their educational goals. Going on to property taxes, the initial goal was to, at a maximum, keep the overall tax rate at the same level as the prior year. Secondly, a 6% property valuation increase was used as estimated in the preliminary report received from the appraisal district. Third, conversations with the appraisal district indicated new construction should be approximately $450 million. Well, to go on, since this report was submitted on Thursday, I have received the certified totals from the appraisal district, which show property values have increased by over 11%. While this increase will lower the overall tax rate, it does not increase anticipated revenues. By legislature, the college is limited to an 8% increase over the no new revenue rate, which the current budget reflects. While I'm awaiting to receive the additional information from the tax office, I must estimate the overall tax rate will decrease by at least 1 cent. Going on to state appropriation, as the college is in the second year.
Can we stop right there?
I'm
and
sorry.
let's have a conversation about the property tax assumptions. We just want to make sure that we're all on the same. So you're saying that you think as a result of the valuations that we are going to see a 1 cent decrease in the M&O tax rate?
In the overall tax rate, at least a 1%.
Okay.
There is some limited information I still have not received from the Nueces County Tax Office. Right now, it's somewhere between 1 and 1.3 cents is what I'm estimating at this time.
And then what about the new construction number?
The new construction, I put in $450 million. It came in at, I just received San Patricio's appraisal, so I had to add the two, and the two together came in at $526 million in new construction.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments regarding property tax? Mr. Kelly?
So the new construction, is that factored into the 1.3 cent tax decrease?
Yes, that is always configured in because you take your total valuations, then you back out all your new construction to come up with your no new revenue rate, and then you calculate your tax on that. So any additional construction is added tax you get on top of the prior year valuations.
Okay, so the 1.3 cents is just on the increase in property values alone, not the new construction.
Well, yes and no. I add that in at the very end so I can calculate my total overall tax.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to do the best savings I can for the taxpayer.
Okay, thank you.
And keep within the 8% rollback rate.
Okay.
Mr. Garcia?
Yes, so.
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, this is one of those slides that we think we're going to provide as an update at our next board meeting. We'll show you the new adjusted rates. I'm looking at the controller's website where they describe the timeline for what is to be distributed. And from July 25th through October is a time frame when we, as an agency, start to receive the appraisal information and other pieces of information in order to calculate these tax rates. As Mr. John Johnson mentioned, we're just received a portion of the information that is factored into the calculations. We're still waiting a few other pieces of information that we should expect in the next couple of days. So it's fair to say that we will have, more than likely have, an updated tax rate at that August 9th date, and it's going to change from what you'll see today. But our estimate is what John mentioned.
Yeah. The overall tax revenue shouldn't change significantly. Normally, like I say, we put in about $4.9 million in revenue in the budget. We estimate by the time we're finished doing our calculation, it could be anywhere from 4.6 to 5.2. So I'm still getting those numbers from the county today.
But your target one target is to keep it at 8% or less.
Right.
The other target is to match the expenses and to lower than the tax rate for whatever we need to match what our planned expenditures are.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So as we look at the expenditure side, we're not going to pad the budget just because we potentially have more revenue to get up to the 8%.
There would only be an addition to the budget if the board found that there was something that they wanted to add to the expenditure side at this point.
Okay. Any other questions about the property tax calculations? Yes, Mr. Garza?
I've got one real quick. In the following conversation, I heard this 1.3 cents
Right.
off the 20. In one comment you made, you said 1%. So 1.3 cents is actually like a 5% reduction in our current tax rate, correct? I mean,
Yeah, John, I caught it too. You said it was 1 cent, and then you said 1%.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
It's
just,
one
that's what it
cent.
was.
I'm just trying to
That's-
clarify
Yeah,
for
not
the
the same
public's
thing.
sake, yeah.
I
Not the same thing.
misspoke. It's 1 cent.
1
okay,
cent.
perfect. Okay, thank you.
I heard that too.
Any other questions on that piece?
Thank you.
Okay. Going on to the state appropriations, as you're aware, we're still in the second year of the biennium, so there's no significant changes in state appropriations. We did see a small adjustment for insurance and retirement contributions. Any questions on that information? So going on to the next slide, as you can see, the adjustments I'm showing here for the insurance and retirement contribution come up to $324,000 in additional revenues. My tuition and fees backing off the 10% that we took off our enrollment projections and adding a few dollars for additional testing fees and those type of things, we show a reduction in our tuition budget from last year of $1,896,000. Property taxes, we're at $4.934 million with the, like I say, with the I think my calculation was at 7.8% increase over the no new revenue rate, my estimate. And then miscellaneous revenues, we decreased by $259,000. That had to do with the fact that over the last years, we've overestimated the amount of interest earnings that we would receive. And as you well know, in those prior 2 years, interest rates did drop. We're hoping to get back some of that interest as interest rates go up this next year, but I don't think at this point in time we will make up the difference. Any questions on that slide? Okay, going on to the next slide. This is just a tax rate history over the last 5 years. This slide presents a 5-year comparison of both the M&O and debt service tax rates. The dark blue represents the M&O rate, while the debt service is shown in light blue. The column on the far right shows the overall tax rate was kept at the same level as the prior year when we did our preliminary budget, but that should change. The information at the bottom shows the amount an average taxable homestead would pay under each taxing scenario for each year. Are there any questions? If not, I'll pass it on to Jackie or Kathy.
Good afternoon, Regents. We have been including these next 3 slides in our budget presentations to emphasize the importance of resource allocation during our annual budgeting process, that all new requests for additional funds must be tied to our strategic plan. Then this slide shows you all the goals that are included in the strategic plan. And then this slide shows our highlights and focus of the budget 2023. First of all, to provide Oso Creek operational expenses, support the expansion of programming in our service area, and last but not least, recruit and retain exceptional faculty and staff. And now I will turn it over to Tammy, who will talk about salaries.
Thank you. In the June 2022 Board of Regents meeting, administration provided 4 salary increase scenarios with the associated budget investment. Today, administration is proposing the following. Faculty to receive the year experience pay at the current rate of $829, and the other 3 pay components of base, education, and rank for faculty receive a 2% increase to their respective rate schedules. For example, the 9-month faculty base is currently at $52,000. The 2% increase would take it to $53,040. The budget impact for that particular scenario would be a little over $777,000. The associated benefits would be $173,546 for a total salary and benefits for faculty increase of $950,600. On exempt employees to receive a 2% increase, the budget investment for that would be a little over $300,000, and the benefits associated will be a little over $67,000, with a total salary and benefits for exempt of $367,522. Next, we go to our employee type of non-exempt staff. We are proposing a 3% increase to non-exempt. This, providing this extra consideration to our hourly employees was a unified message that we did receive from the college-wide compensation committee, so we felt like it was important to put that consideration forward and add that extra percent to our hourly employees. And that budget investment would be a little over $234,000, benefits a little over $52,000, and a total investment of a little over $287,000. So this particular proposal for salary increases, salary and benefits for all employee types that are eligible would be $1,605,242. This slide shows the salary expense by the employee types, the pay types, with the associated budget and position adjustments. It also shows the proposed increases that we just reviewed and also the vacancy factor that we use. The new position column is primarily for Oso Creek campus and the Del Mar College Police Department. So if you see that increase in the new position columns, that's what it's primarily for. The non-exempt line is where most of the support services and ground services and facility services for Oso Creek, and also where our commissioned officers would be under that non-exempt column. So that's where the majority of that comes from. So the position adjustments mainly are due to, for the faculty column, as we spoke about in June, we are budgeting for the use of term faculty based on our utilization over the past 2 to 3 years. So we have lowered the head count, but we have looked at utilization, and we made sure, and I worked with Dr. Halcom and team to make sure that we do have what we feel like is appropriate budget for term faculty. Budgeting vacant positions at a master's entry level rather than the amount that the exiting faculty member was making when they left. So those are some of our what we call position adjustments. The overall part-time expense changes are basically neutral. What we did to assist with enhancing our tracking of instruction-related personnel expenses, you will see a shift from part-time non-exempt salaries into a new budget account or a new budget line for part-time non-exempt salaries instruction. So this is so we can track that instruction no matter what category it falls in. So it was pretty much a neutral shift. Next in the expense for the salary increases that we just discussed, along with the time is with a line for vacancy factor. Because we all know that we do not have 100% of our positions filled 100% of the time. So this is that adjustment for the vacancy factor throughout the year in all position types. So taking into consideration all of the changes that we just reviewed, the overall compensation changes to the proposed FY23 budget is approximately $1,127,156. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but with the shifts that are occurring with the adjustments and the vacancy rate and the shift in the instructional non-exempt salaries to a separate line, could you show us in the report in August what those final totals will be for all of our salary lines? I think it will be helpful. You're showing us the changes. We're only asking you, so the changes will be a 1.127. So I'm just trying to understand. I guess that's later on.
It will be a slide coming up. So there are
go.
some, that information, yes, ma'am, is on a slide that will come up in a couple of slides.
I see it now. Thank
Okay,
you.
you're welcome.
Sorry.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got a question. So going back to the last slide, you were recommending a 3% increase for our hourly employees. I'm guessing you're talking about custodial staff, groundskeepers, maintenance, that type of thing?
It would be all hourly, which would be our administrative assistants, groundskeepers, facilities technicians. So there's a wide variety. It would be hourly people that work in our food service. So it's all employees that are categorized as non-exempt, all hourly.
I'm going to assume that these are the people that probably have been impacted the most by inflation. When we come back, could you show us what a 4% increase would look like as well?
Yes, I mean, one more percent would be approximately $90,000.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, on the same note, I'm just wondering, once we have all of our numbers, if there's a way to do any additional pay raises just to help out the people who make us Del Mar.
We're already doing some adjustments, and that's the pros and cons of this meeting. And I'm going to say on the pros side, we have that latitude. This feedback is very important. We're already, as you're speaking, we're calculating and recalculating numbers that were somewhat, their shelf life is already being expired, as you can tell. So we've got some wiggle room, and any and all feedback is important right now as we come back for the next budget meeting. Absolutely. That's what this meeting is about. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my primary focus are on our employees that probably have the least amount of wiggle room in their personal budgets. I would like to emphasize them.
Understood. And clarity, I don't know, I heard two different things there, and so I want to make sure that Dr. Turner's and Regents Kelly's comments are discerned, so we'll talk further to make sure we understand what you're saying clearly, more clearly, at least me. Thank you.
Yes, if I may, I do have a question then. So earlier, there was a comment raised about expenses, right? And whether or not our revenue stream will be at the cap that we're talking about today, and whether or not expenses would change. This type of proposition would change a little bit. So if we're talking about a change in expenses, then there is the possibility that any small opportunity to fund that would hopefully come from property taxes. So I just want to emphasize that fact. But more to come in our next board meeting as to how we're going to fund that extra 1% that we're hearing today.
Oh, I understand that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. I'll turn it over to Jackie.
Good afternoon. So for our preliminary non-salary expense budget for fiscal year 2023, we are still estimating about $2.3 million. Most of these expenses are related to the Oso Creek campus for things such as custodial services, ground maintenance, property insurance, fire and safety monitoring. So we are estimating an increase in campus police, that since this is going to be that first year that they are going to be fully operational. We are estimating an increase in security contracts that's primarily related to extending our services to the Oso Creek campus, and then we also had an increase in our contract renewal this year. Next year is an election, so we do have our election expense included. We are anticipating an increase in our IT computer equipment, and that's primarily related to moving those funds back that we reallocated last year, so it's just replenishing their budget. We are also anticipating an increase in testing fees. That's offset by our increased revenues for those tests that students pay to take. So during our analysis, we really took a look at our utilities budget. We corresponded with our consultant, and we were able to identify about $510,000 within our electricity budget that we were able to reallocate to other priorities. Are there any questions on this slide? So this here is our preliminary expense budget for fiscal year 2023. For our salaries and benefits, this represents the changes that Ms. McDonald just discussed on that other slide, so you can see that those amounts tie very nicely. So our total salaries and benefits change is $1.1 million. For our non-exempt categories, we have the items that we discussed on the previous slide. We are estimating a $51,000 increase in our contingency. That's to meet that 1.5% that's required by board policy. So our total preliminary change is $3.4 million, which is a 3% change from fiscal year 2022. So the next two slides is just a further breakdown of our expense object codes or categories. So again, on the total salaries and benefits, we have the $1.1 million change. For our non-salary categories, we're estimating a $333,000 increase under supplies. That's related mainly to those testing fees. The $293,000 increase under equipment, that's mainly related to replenishing IT's computer budget and a little bit for campus police. We are estimating an increase in our tax appraisal fees, so we've included $14,000 under our audit and legal fees category. And then the other changes in the category is just departments reallocating their funds. Do we have any questions on this slide? Okay. So the $160,000 is for our election expense next year. The $456,000 increase under security, again, is for those extended services to Oso Creek and the increase in our contract renewal this year. We really took a look at our bad debt. Over the last 3 years, we've been averaging about $140,000, so we were able to reallocate $98,000 of that budget to other priorities. The utilities and telephone, that $529,000, that's mostly related to the $510,000 that we able to identify in the electricity budget, and then some other adjustments that we were able to find that we reallocated. Our property insurance premium increased, and with the addition of the Oso Creek campus, we are anticipating a little over $1 million. And since our last visit, we went back and we discussed and we reviewed our budget for campus police. And over the last few years, we've been budgeting $513,000. And then with this next budget year, now that we're moving those full-time salaries up into our non-exempt categories, we were able to go ahead and reduce that and reallocate $13,000. So next year, our tuition bond payment is going to increase by $4,500. And then the $104 under miscellaneous, that's just departments reallocating their funds. So with the items we discussed in our contingency, again, our proposed preliminary budget change is $3,412,772, which is a 3% increase from fiscal year 2022.
I have a question regarding campus police. So
Yes,
if
ma'am.
the salaries are up in non-exempt salaries and some of the equipment is under, I think you said you moved some of that to equipment, what is the $500,000 for under campus police? In
That's
general?
Yeah, in general, it's the one-time startup cost. There are so many things that you have to purchase at one time, vehicle, uniforms, badges, radios. We didn't want to purchase those ahead of time because of warranty. We don't want the warranty to start expiring, I guess you could say. So and those are thousands of dollars and thousands of dollars. So it's those one-time costs to stand up a department.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. When you're talking about security and campus police, and I certainly see the difference in for the new campus, the increase. Is there going to be anything that's different in light of everything that's happened in our K-12 schools within our college, or do we have a firm hand, as firm of a hand that we can have on our security at this time?
I think at any point in time, we all can improve. So I think we are looking at every angle. We do feel like as far as what we have in place is working. Of course, with the addition of our full-time officers coming on board in a few months, that will also assist. But we do currently utilize off-duty police officers, Corpus Christi PD. So they are on campus now. So we do have a presence of those commissioned officers. Yes, sir.
I'd like to just kind of comment on that from a historical standpoint, especially for the newer Regents. It's the whole onset and creation of our own police department really came from some dark days in our history, where what happened in our recent history, as we all know painfully, all too painfully aware of, in Uvalde, occurred some years ago. And so in different places around the country. And so the creation of the police department really came on the heels of such a time and period. The evolution, albeit slow, admittedly, it expanded, and we have grown. Our initial concept of what the police department would have looked like even 7 years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, to what it is today. Even then, just as Tammy said, just as Ms. McDonald said, as soon as you improve your game, it's already changed. And so that's what you're referring to, Dr. Villarreal, and we totally appreciate that. That being said, as we're on the cusp of launching our department and opening up much more stout plan than from years ago. We'll adjust as best we can and fortify, protect our campuses and and all of our people the best that we possibly can with what we have.
Will that plan be presented to us at some time, just for, at least for,
Oh,
just for us to be aware of it?
Absolutely, and it's a combination. It's a complexity of history, data, statistics, personnel that we're fortifying as well for the leadership aspects of that particular function of the college, and so it's got its entirety being developed. As soon as we get those pieces of the puzzle put together, you can bet we're going to come and do some things. In addition to probably, well, we'll put a full presentation together.
I just want to underscore that, Dr. Villarreal. I think in light of everything that we've seen and heard and learned, that for us to maybe a combination of open session briefing, but also potentially some closed session things, I could assume that there might be some things that we would need to understand. But I think given how policy and practical implementation both play a part in response to campus incidents, I think is important for the board to understand. So I would
And
certainly
not leave
underscore.
out, and not leave out that mental health aspect as well for our students as well. I just see so many of our schools in our K-12 really scrambling to put together a strong plan, but community colleges, universities are completely different with as far as who's able to come onto campus so easily. And so it's different. And I don't have that framework of how it works at a community college or at a university versus a K-12. And so that'll be interesting for me to have that information.
Dr. Villarreal, you bring up a critical point coming into this next legislative session. The talk at the state level is for mental health services. That mental health services for the entire state will be a big item coming into the session, and we are not precluded and excluded from that conversation. Much to come on that.
Okay.
Questions related to our non-salary expense items? Thank you, Jackie.
Yes, ma'am. That's it? Okay. So now Mr. Garcia will continue with the 5-year forecast.
Okay. So we are now transitioning to our 5-year forecast, which is the final section of our presentation. There have been many challenges with building today's forecast due to the uncertainty caused by the ongoing pandemic. In addition, there now exists an elevated level of uncertainty on the financial implications to the college caused by continued federal monetary policy changes to restore price stability. With that said, Mr. John Johnson and Ms. Landrum will lead the conversation on our data-driven 5-year forecast.
Okay, if any of you happen to have last year's, you'll see that the information over our 5-year forecast is changing significantly with each month we learn new information. Now, in trying to put together a 5-year forecast, it's very difficult for me to predict what's been happening, because this has been in the 29 years I've been here, these last 3 to 4 years have been extremely unusual. So normally people hate it when I use the word conservative, but it's basically based on what I know and what I think may happen. So on the tuition and fees for our 5-year forecast, I'm using an enrollment growth of 1%. Now, why 1%? Well, we reduced this year by 10, but we were really down 17 to 18% overall. So even though we first need to make up for that 7% that we didn't take into consideration when we did this year's budget. And I think we will grow in addition to the 1%, but I am using a 1% enrollment growth. So over the 5 years, we should should be able to make up that difference. Our tuition and fee increase, I use the current policy we have as $1 semester hour. On property taxes, I think over the next, from years 23 to 27, you'll see a continual decline in our tax rate due to the fact that our debt service requirement, our obligation bonds, will decrease. Those are anticipated to decrease from year 23 to 22.5 million, all the way down to 16.7 million in year 2027. So our debt service rate will continue to decrease. My forecast in looking at the actual dollars collected, although it's not really up here, I used a 3% increase over the no new revenue rate. Our average over the last 5 years has been in excess of that, but I think that's very conservative using 3%. That I don't think that in any way is a significant increase over what we've done at any prior time. State of... I'm sorry? Well, the no new revenue rate is what we would get based on the prior year property valuations, but it's 3% over that rate is what I'm actually, I think up here it says 4.5%, but I actually used 3. I'm changing my adjustment as we speak. I apologize for that. State appropriations and actually miscellaneous revenue over the next 5 years, I kept the same. I think we will see an increase in state appropriations based on what I'm hearing. Miscellaneous revenue, you never know how that's going to be, but I think the current amount of about 1.1 million, I think, is what we're showing is pretty consistent.
I do want to make a comment on the revenue assumptions. That you're exactly right, Mr. Johnson. We, based on state appropriations, we have to assume what we know today. That is going to change at some point during the legislative session with the work coming out of the commission. And so I would hope that we have the ability, I know we have the ability to focus on what those proposed changes are and be able to react quickly to help inform how that might impact Del Mar College and overall the state. I know that you're actively involved with the CFO group, Mr. Garcia, to provide that kind of feedback to the commission. But that work is going to change significantly. And so we know that number is going to change. We just don't have any way to predict what it is today.
No, we do, with discussions with Mark, I think he's had with the board, I think there's a good indication that way we will receive more money. Hopefully miscellaneous revenues will increase and also tuition. With all that being said, that should continue to lower our tax rate.
So for our estimated non-salary or estimated expense budget for our forecast for salary and benefits, we did a 2% increase on salaries for each of the years, and the benefit levels will change based on that level of salaries. So for the non-salary operating expenses, we did an increase of 8.5% from fiscal year 23 to 24, and then we did a 5% increase for each of the following years. And that's to accommodate those inflation rates and the increased cost. Do we have any questions on those? Okay, and then Mr. Johnson will continue with the next slide.
Okay, based on the previous assumptions I alluded to, your state funding will stay the same over the next 5 years. Your tuition and fees will increase by the 1% enrollment growth plus a $1 increase in per semester hour rate. Your property taxes, and I apologize for including a 4.5% increase over the no new revenue rate. It was actually, my calculations were at 3. I failed to give that information to other people. So anyway, you can see as each year goes by, we incrementally increase our total revenues. Are there any specific questions on that? Okay, this slide gives you an indication of what our tax rates, what our tax rate forecast will be over the next 5 years. And of course, as I said before, your debt service rate will continue to decline. As you can see, in years 23, our debt service rate is 0.072882. And in year 27, that'll drop all the way to 0.047613. Again, you have an incremental increase each year because of your continued operating costs that will grow over the next 5 years. But looking at it, your overall tax rate will drop from 0.283340 to 0.269200. Are there any questions on that? Thank you.
Any wrap-up comments, Mr. Garcia?
No, that pretty much concludes our presentation. What I have before me is a to-do list. Number one is to make sure that we have a complete set of information for us to calculate our tax rates, and so we will provide an update at our August 9th board meeting. On top of that, there's been an ask for us to firm up a little bit better our raises as it relates for non-exempt employees. So we're going to sharpen our pencils and take a deeper, closer look to see how we can do that and fund that as well. Did I miss anything else?
I don't think so. Mr. Bennett, I see your mic is open. Do you have questions?
I do. I have some overall questions, and I probably should address them to Dr. Escamilla. The 10% decline in enrollment, is that based on contact hours?
That is generalized in a head count calculation. Yep. And I understand what you're saying, and by doing it in a head count calculation, it's a rougher estimate. And then also there is the calculation of contact hours, as it includes, as we're, there's that whole other part of the conversation where we're talking about the CE contact hours. So doing it by head count on the credit side, John, unless I'm missing something, that's your calculation. You're not even talking about CE. So it's not even calculated in. So we have more opportunities still out there. As John continues with his, as he says, his conservative estimate, it is not including some other contact hours that are out there for us.
Okay, so based on what I'm seeing, the contact hours have been declining since 2015, 2016. And they're expected to decline approximately another 10% this year. Is that a fair assumption?
No, that's not what we're saying.
No, sir.
Not at all. What we're saying is that, as you recall from our last financial presentation, overall, our tuition revenue has declined. Approximately, we're estimating that this year will be close to about $4 million. And what we're saying is we recognize that when we're going to bake some of that decline in revenue in this up and coming budget, that 10% does not mean a further declining, but more decline in our current enrollment relative to the prior semester. What we're saying is we're resizing prior year's budget to reflect current trends in our enrollment, if that makes sense, budgetary-wise. So we're not saying that our enrollment is going to decline by another 10%. We're just being a little bit more realistic as to what the numbers are going to be based on what we're seeing today. $4 million decline. We're saying that we're going to turn around our enrollment to the tune of $3 million in this budget presentation, meaning $4 million that we're estimating our tuition loss for this year. We're factoring in a drop in our budget of $1 million, leaving on the table a $3 million turnaround in our enrollments to get us to pre-pandemic levels.
Two other. I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett. Go ahead, please.
So I did hear that we were 18% down. 18% down from what?
From pre-pandemic levels.
Okay, so we're down about 18% in total student enrollment, which would be contact hours and what else?
Tuition and fee revenues altogether.
Okay, so that's all. You can break that down in contact hours, and of course the tuitions and fees for dual credit students are less. So it's a combination of several things. Secondly, what are our contingency balances?
So in terms of our risk reserve fund, we still have about $8 million, and we still, and I think we have baked in there a figure that for any tuition revenue losses, that was factored into our risk reserve that we currently have in its full original funding level of $8 million.
Okay, so we have a board policy that we reserve 1.5% as a contingency every year.
Yes, on top of the $8 million. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever used that during the current year?
We have not used that in the time period that I've been here. So
I can't recall ever using it.
Yes.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So what typically happens, and this has been a history even before me coming on board, is the college takes an assessment, a pulse of what the finances of the colleges looks like mid-year, and then if there is a downward trend or an upward trend in expenses, then we take action and ask college-wide for a reduction in spending or a more manageable spending as we finalize the year. And we did something like that earlier this year, is that we said, hey, let's slow down our spending a little bit. Let's carve out some dollars because we really don't know what's going to happen from now until year end. Plus, we really don't know what's going to happen next year. So we are very conservative, or have been conservative in our spending. And that's why we've never touched our 1% contingency, and we have not touched our $8 million risk reserve fund. And so, but that's part of the overall strategy. That's
actually, it's 1.5% contingency, is it not?
Yes, 1.5, yes.
Okay, so here's my concern. As we discussed all that, I think we're being ultra conservative with that 1.5% contingency because we've never used it, we've never had to use it, and we've got reserves already established. So that's being an ultra conservative approach, which increases our tax rate, of course, by the 1.5%. In addition to that, we're going to be several years getting back to our pre-pandemic level, which we're down 18%. We're estimating a 1% increase every year, and it may be more, but it may not, because I've taken historical data and extrapolated it for the college before and been completely wrong because I hadn't counted on some things that I didn't know about. So even being conservative, we may be off on that. My final comment is that the raises that we've got, that we're proposing, I think are really way too low. With inflation at this year estimated at well over 8%, I don't think we're doing anybody a favor giving raise 2 and 3%. And I do believe we've now got money available to increase that raise to 5% and possibly 6% without any adjustment. Would I be correct in?
Well, Mr. Bennett, I want to first circle back to your original comment about our contingency and your analysis. I would say in the past 3 years, there's nothing normal. And I nothing's going to be normal, my guess is, for the next 2 years because, the pandemic has caused so much uncertainty in so many ways. You know, first, the Fed comes in, they flood the nation with cash. That causes inflation. And now the Feds are coming back with monetary policy of increasing the Fed rate, and they can easily shock the system and throw us into a recession. And so it's like all these unknowns, and things are happening so quickly and so fastly that, I worry that whether or not we have enough contingency to get us through the next 2 to 3 years, knowing what we know today, which is really nothing. Sorry about that. So I hope that helps. That I know you've done your analysis, but the anomaly is the pandemic. I'm sorry.
I do agree with what you said, with one exception. We've already made it through the pandemic, or a whole lot of the pandemic, without touching that 1.5%. So I'm still believing that that's an ultra-conservative approach. Probably don't need to continue taking.
Yes. What's different today, too, is that the HERF funding that's helped us over the last 2 years is gone. And so, yes, I have not used the 1.6 million over the last 2 years because we were fiscally responsible in managing the HERF dollars to get us through the crisis. But those dollars are gone after this year. And so the question is, what is going to be next year's crisis? What should we expect in terms of whether or not revenues are going to be on point, or whether inflation will continue? Remember, back in the Paul Volcker years, when he raised the Fed rate, it got up to 20%. We're just now at 1.75%. But what happened when he raised the rates to 20% back then? Recession came in, and that lasted for about a year. So those are all my questions that I have that I don't have no answers, but it keeps me up at night in trying to figure out how to fund all these needs.
I understand, I appreciate it, but again, those are my concerns, and I'd like to roll back the fact that I think our employees deserve and need a much larger raise than what we're proposing.
So that in itself is another challenge. Earlier I spoke to legislative limits. The legislators who proposed these tax limits, man, they were really smart. They thought of this scenario that we have today. It's amazing. What have we talked about over the course of the year? Well, real estate is one of those investments that scaled up, that performed very well during the pandemic, and I think I saw 17%. But guess what? I'm capped at 8%. Right now, today's budget proposal is at the cap. I cannot increase it unless we go for voter approval. And so the question is, anything beyond what we are presenting today in salary increases, we may have a different conversation, would be my guess. I'm not sure.
And there's other strategies beyond our locals and state policies. And we have accreditation requirements and all those kinds of things that we'd have to roll into the conversation. There are other caveats as well, Mr. Bennett and Regents, that really, as Chair Scott said just a little while ago, the legislature is going to bring a whole different dynamic to this. What we come out with next year this time, it's going to look very different after the commission is reviewed and so forth. And if the extent to which that will be, we don't know yet. Another unpredictable caveat, if you will. And then there are the whole base year dynamics and the like that we're dealing with. Both sides of the conversation that has to do with enrollment statewide means that chances are we're following trends. If we're able to buck some trends with some internal strategies, i.e. continuing education and the like, we may come out ahead as we did at the last legislative cycle and base year. So again, lots of things going on, lots of open-ended conversations. We put that risk reserve fund back together, not knowing that HERF was coming our way. HERF has sustained us for a while, and as those funds are being used, we do have other layers for protection. But I do understand, Mr. Bennett, your support for employees, and we do understand that. We are taking lots of notes, and when we come back to our next budget proposal meeting, we will have some adjustments I can already foresee. Thank you.
Could I take what I've heard and offer what might be an alternative for you all to consider? We have contingencies from previous years, and added to that, the $8 million risk reserve fund. Are there one-time costs in the budget that we could transfer money from the risk reserve fund to cover some of those one-time costs, obviously with board approval? Would be one way to fund some things and potentially get them out of the revenue cap discussion. The other thing to potentially consider would be a one-time bonus payment to employees out of that same risk reserve fund that wouldn't raise their overall base salary, but would give them some potential cash to assist with the inflationary pressures that we've been discussing. I'm hesitant to raise to give folks an overall percentage raise, because then that has to carry over from now henceforth and forevermore. And so I think looking at potentially a couple of options where we take some one-time cash infusion out of the risk reserve fund and move that into our operating budget might be a solution you all could play with if the board gives you some verbal feedback on that potential idea, is something we could look at.
Those things were mentioned in the development meetings prior to this meeting as the team prepared this budget conversation. And so that one-time costs, other things, all those things that we have all those notes on, we know now to bring them back into the scenario as possibility. Mr. Garcia?
Yes. Sure. The board policy as it relates to the contingency fund, and I think the amount of this year is somewhere in the ballpark of 1.2, 1.3 million. This year's contingency, 1.6. So this year we do have a contingency of $1.6 million, but the board policy is very restrictive on how we can spend that. But with that said, we've never used the 1.6 million. Maybe, based on your recommendation of funding the one-time spend, could be funded with this year's contingency or next year's contingency, given that we still have the $8 million in risk reserve. And then I would ask that maybe we come back to our original plan for the 1.6, but this would be a one-time exception given the unique situation that we're in today. Would that be a possibility?
Yeah. To find something out of our undesignated reserve funds, so I'll just leave it at that. So wherever you think it might come from might be a way to look at a couple of things that Mr. Bennett has brought up, but then with the realization of our revenue caps.
We have several possibilities.
Yeah.
We'll bring them back.
And then if I may ask, would that be a board action item, Mr. President and Mr. Rivera?
We'll roll it all back into the big presentation for the budget.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think if you need board action to either waive a board policy or to amend a board policy prior to adopting something like that, then that would certainly be something I think the board would entertain. I'm not seeing anybody reach for their microphones and say, no, don't do that.
Wonderful. Great conversation. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Good.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Do we have closed session items? Yes? Yes.
But I have one introduction to make. But
Yes. Before we go into closed session, we have an introduction.
yes, that'd be fun. So, Regents, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you one of our newest employees. There's always a few days in between. I think he's been on board. Our new Chief Information Officer, his name is Ali Calduz, who joins us from South Texas, from down in the Rio Grande Valley, where he was doing comparable work. I'm proud to say that our new CIO has been in place. We've had meetings. He's hit the ground running. He and his team are operating Ali, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself, and say hello.
You press the green button.
Great CIO, right? Great first impression. Thank
Rookie.
you, Dr. Escamilla. Good afternoon, the board. I do know what I'm doing technologically, typically. I'm very proud to be here at Del Mar, and I want to thank the board, Dr. Escamilla, for extending the opportunity to join the team. It's been a great and hectic four weeks. One of the staff likened it drinking from the fire hose, and that's exactly what it's been, trying to get up to speed on everything. Lots of thanks to Ms. Lenora Key. She's been extremely helpful in getting it in place, and I have a very strong team that I've got the opportunity to work with. So looking forward to making a contribution to Del Mar, working on student success on the IT section, and if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for the board.
We look forward to working with you. Thank you for joining the Del Mar team, and we love the folks at South Texas College, but gosh, we sure are happy to recruit some of their talent whenever we get an opportunity to. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Quick anecdote, my wife and I just closed on our house, and I had the opportunity to meet Mr. Scott.
Well, wonderful.
Yeah, he was there at our signing, so he was very complimentary of you, and my wife, I think, might have gotten jealous because I don't compliment her that much, so lesson.
Well, when he
Yeah.
hears Del Mar College, he knows to brag. So.
There you go. Nice meeting all of you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dr. Escamilla, for introducing him. We will now go into closed session under Texas Government Code 551.071 regarding pending or contemplated litigation or settlement offer with possible discussion, action, and open session, and the seeking of legal advice from counsel on pending or contemplated legal matters or claims with possible discussion and action in open session. And under Texas Government Code 551.074A1 regarding the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, or dismissal of public officer or employee, including a personnel update with possible discussion and action in open session. The time is 1:07 p.m. Are we anticipating a workshop for August 9th? We don't think we are.
We don't have anything. There's a very robust agenda already. If anything, moving the time for that might be a consideration. There are currently 12 items. I'm trying to keep it to 12. We just reviewed that yesterday, but no, ma'am.
But that includes our final budget conversation as well.
It has various components that have to do with the budget. Mr. Garcia?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sorry.
Whether or not we're going to have a workshop on August 9th on our regular board meeting date.
Sure, I was thinking in terms of, we definitely want to provide some updates on today's discussions, and so it could be just as simple as a 3 or 4 slide update of what we saw today, but I'm open to any other suggestions.
All right, we have agenda prep tomorrow, so we'll let you know as soon as we finish with that, what the plan is. All right.
Is there, I just had a question, is there any updates on Robstown?
No, that will be on our agenda for
Okay.
discussion and action to call the election. So we'll both call that election as well as our election on August 9th. Anything else for calendar items? If not, we will stand adjourned at 1:42 p.m. Thank you all very much.